Here's the background. Harry Oppenheimer, a picture of a business magnate, philanthropist, and titan for the mining industry. For others, the archetype of white monopoly capital. But the man headed up Anglo-American and De Beers more than a quarter of a century. But can he be described in such simple terms? Well, let's find out. From Michael Cardo was given access to Oppenheimer's private papers and extensive interviews with the family members and very close associates. You're about to see it on the wall behind me. It's resulted in Harry Oppenheimer, Diamonds, Gold, and Dynasty. He joins us on the show. Michael, good to have you, and congrats on the book. By the way, I mean, where do you begin to write a book like this? Where do you even start? I mean, you must have sat there and gone, a legacy like this, a controversial figure at times as well. Where do you even begin to put the first words down?
Well, I began at the archive at the Brenthurst Library, which is a magnificent repository of Afrikaner on the Oppenheimer's family estate. The library was actually built by Harry Oppenheimer in 1984, and all the family papers are kept there. So all of Harry Oppenheimer's papers, as well as those of his wife, Bridget Oppenheimer, and other family members. And there are some wonderful things in the archives, ranging from the letters that he wrote as a schoolboy to his father. He was at school at Charterhouse, a public school in England, and all his letters are there from that period, as well as the letters that he wrote to his father during the Second World War. So I had to make my way through all this correspondence, several of his diaries, and that's before you get to all the business memoranda. And of course, Oppenheimer was a member of Parliament for a period of almost a decade, between 1948 and 1957. So I had to make my way through all that information, package it together, and thread it into a story.
Why you? Why were you given this access?
Well, I am a trained historian, so I had written a previous biography. I've got a particular interest in the political history of liberalism in South Africa in the 20th century. And so I suppose on the basis of my first book, I was thought of as a suitable candidate to write Oppenheimer's life. There was no pre-existing biography of him, which made it even more challenging. There was one dual biography written of Harry Oppenheimer and his father, Sir Ernest Oppenheimer, which was published almost 50 years ago in 1973. So most of the research materials were primary sources.
I suppose also, while you're using all these primary sources, you still have to write a book. You still have to thread a golden thread and a narrative as well. And I suppose you have to address issues. If we take a look at the three ways that Oppenheimer was viewed. I mean, if we go back, and you can unpack this for me. Financier, philanthropist, I mentioned that as well. But also National Party regarding him as a bit of a threat as well. I think that was mid-1900s, 1950s, 1960s. Then we had Nelson Mandela. I want to make sure I got this right. Nelson Mandela praising him as a nation builder. And then we get a third version as well, demonized for white monopoly capital. It's a complex character to unpack. What was your impression of all of this?
I mean, people are seldom neutral about Oppenheimer because he was such a towering figure in South African history. There are people who are ardent admirers of his, and also those who are detractors of his. And in the 1950s, you're quite right, the National Party regarded Harry Oppenheimer as an existential threat to Afrikanerdom. You know, he symbolized everything they detested. He was the embodiment of what they called die Geldmacht, money power, this shadowy, sinister force that was the real power of the country. And there are echoes, I say, in the introduction to the book between how the National Party regarded Oppenheimer in the 1950s and how the proponents of so-called radical economic transformation view him today. The kind of people who employ the language of white monopoly capital, they tend to demonize Oppenheimer. But what I try and do in this biography is illuminate the shades of grey, because he was a complex man who had a multifaceted legacy in all those capacities that you've outlined, and he was praised by Mandela after his death as somebody who'd contributed to the development of the nation and also to heralding non-racial democracy in South Africa.
As I start saying goodbye to you, I want you to tell me where the book is available, because I'm seeing it here, obviously. I imagine it's all good bookstores, etc., etc., but give me details, because I'm not a book person. I know I should be a book person. I always feel bad when someone gives me a book, because I'm an iPad person. I like to just flip through and leave bookmarks. But tell me about where the book's available. But while we do that as well, who's reading this book? Is it a historian? Is it someone who doesn't like the Oppenheimers? Is it someone who does like the Oppenheimers? Who are you going after here?
Right, well, it's available at all good bookstores nationwide. But actually, I'm going for a general readership. I've tried to produce a historical biography, so at the same time that I aim to produce a vivid portrait of the man, Oppenheimer itself, I also look at the history of South Africa in the 20th century because Harry Oppenheimer was born in 1908, he died in 2000, so he straddles the whole of 20th century South African history. And I think all those who are interested in our nation's past and its very many different facets should buy this book because hopefully they'll learn something new.
Did the family like it?
Well, I was given full access to the archive, and I don't think that would have happened if they didn't think that I was going to produce something which they could regard as decent.
Decent and accurate and fair and all those good things. Michael, congrats on the book and all the best with the sales on the book as well. It can be makes for fascinating reading as well. I'm actually going to go look for it for a digital version. Michael Cardo, author of Harry Oppenheimer, Diamonds, Gold and Dynasty, as he says, available in all good bookstores. You can go and find that as well for some wonderful weekend reading. I'm sure you'll just flip through it as quickly as possible because Michael's right. Fascinating character to read about, regardless, I think, on which way you fall on the Oppenheimer family.